Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Hey, what's going on out there in fantasy football land? It's your boy Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by the analytical assassin, the mayor of Tombstone. If you follow him on Twitter at Dwain McFarland, because every response to a tweet is now a Val Kilmer Tombstone gif. So it's Dwain McFarland, Pro Football Focused, EstablishTheRun.com. What's going on, my man? You ready to get going here? We're like the last 2 weeks here of draft season. It's getting crazy.
Yeah, man, I'm ready. And it's amazing. Like, a lot has changed just since we did the draft plan show last week. And, I know you and I have been talking about it off air, texting back and forth, all week. And it's amazing. I know we'll get into it all, but I think we definitely have some tweaks for folks tonight. We can also jump into what happens when you're drafting from down on the end and what happens if you want to take a tight end or receiver. So I tested that out for the group. And, in an FFPC draft, what night was that? Not last night, but the night before, I believe. No, it was last night. So, yeah, excited to share it.
So, first of all, thank you to all the hustlers out there. And we have to come up with some corny name for the people listening to this show. But thanks to you guys, the fans, who made our draft plan show last week by far and away our biggest show we've ever done. In terms of YouTube views, iTunes downloads, just any metric you want to go by, it was a phenomenal show. You guys are subscribing to the YouTube channel. You're leaving 5-star reviews on iTunes. And really, that's the best way to thank us and to thank Dwain for giving out the content that he's giving out, is to just kind of help promote the show. So we appreciate it because, putting this whole show together takes a lot. Dwain and I both have families and we have real jobs, but we love doing this, and we're just blown away at the support and response that we got to the draft plan show. So it was amazing. So thank you guys. And let's just start rocking and rolling. We know most of you have probably been away for a while and you're like, there's not going to be an NFL season. Well, guess what? Surprise, there is. And you're going to be doing drafts probably this weekend. If you're listening to this on Friday or Saturday, maybe you're going to your draft right now. Or next weekend. I know my big draft is always Labor Day weekend. So let's go through some of the training camp news here, Dwain, how it's going to impact fantasy football and maybe how it's reshaped your draft plan. Let's start off in Philadelphia because, hey, where else are you going to start if you're a football fan, right? All right, so the Eagles just lost Andre Dillard, their second-year left tackle for the season today, a bicep injury. They're already without starting right Pro Bowl guard Brandon Brooks. So likely Jason Peters is going to shift back over to left tackle, where he's played for the last decade or so in Philadelphia. And Matt Pryor, kind of a swing guard, interior bench player the Eagles have, is going to start at right guard. Sanders himself has missed a bunch of time lately with a lower body injury. They're not really telling us much anymore in terms of injuries. They're just kind of saying it's almost like college now, lower body injury. But all the insiders say he's going to be okay. He'll be there for the opener. So, Dwain, my question to you, this new O-line news, mysterious injury to Sanders, is he still a first-round fantasy pick? Because if you look at the ADP from Fantasy Mojo's Football Guy's main event over the last 2 days, he's going off at running back 8. That's about 111 in the first round. You have him at RB8 over at PFF. What do you do with Sanders in this Eagles line situation?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about several of these. Yeah, crack it, Drake. It's getting hairy, down at that end. But Sanders is actually the one that I'm still willing. One of the ones that I'm still willing to draft, down there, and I still feel okay about it. I mean, obviously we've got to monitor. I hate this lower body injury where we really don't know anything. It's just it's a crazy situation right now with no preseason games. And then, the team's getting more aggressive about what can be reported, what can be shared. I mean, we're in the dark more than ever, and mistakes are going to be made. We're going to be surprised by things on week 1, and there's nothing we can do about it, Drake. I mean, we're going to have some situations pretty tightly nailed down, but there's going to be stuff that blows us away, and who knows? Miles Sanders and how bad his injury is could be one of those things. You live in Philly, or you live in New York, but you can give the idea around, you listen to Philly and you listen to everything Philadelphia. So you can probably give a better update as to, how much time he's spending walking around on the practice field and, what the reports are, but he's the guy that I'm still willing, to take. Kenyon Drake, it's like, I'm a little more skeptical at this point. Being in the walking boot scares me. We know Chase Edmonds can be a viable fantasy back, and so that just gives me concern, right? I like Boston. I like Boston Scott, but I feel like Edmonds definitely can step right in, to that role and do well. Now, they paid Drake, and we think Drake can do, he can be well if he's healthy. He can do really well. I mean, I think, he still deserves to be in the tier that he's in, but there's just enough doubt there, Drake, that I don't blame people if they start to pivot and say, I'm going to go Devontae Adams. I'm going to go with, Julio Jones. I'm not going to blame, folks, but we'll walk through what that means and how that's going to impact your roster. Because I know you got some other guys you want to talk about that are going to impact, kind of the sweet spot, that we talked about last week, right? Around who's going in the 5th round. Yeah. And I still don't want, that one group of running backs that's coming down to the turn at 3-4. I don't want them. That this hasn't changed anything about that. I still don't want
David Johnson, Gurley.
Yes.
Those kind of guys.
Fournette, Bell, Gordon, Gurley, and David Johnson. I'm out on all those. Like I said last week, you could make a case for Fournette because at least I do believe he's still young. His offense could be a little bit better, but they're still expected to trail. And if he loses passing down work to Chris Thompson, he is immediately going to turn into a nightmare. You're not going to know when to start him. And you also have you just don't know what Leonard Fournette's going to do factor. But if I were to take one of those guys, that would be the one. I mean, if you think about Le'Veon Bell, I don't know what's going to happen with him. Maybe he gets traded because he and Adam Gase, they've got a problem. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be an issue. So Andy's on a team that's not very good because he and Adam Gase, they don't have a lot of, opportunities down inside the 5. So yeah, I still feel the same way about that group of running backs. And Melvin Gordon is, for all intents and purposes right now, it sounds like he could almost evenly be splitting work, with Phillip Lindsay, at least from an attempt standpoint. I expect him to see, more targets. I think he'll get some of the work inside the 5, which makes him a value when he makes it to the 5th round, but people are still taking him in the 3rd.
So if you don't know about Kenyon Drake, he was in the walking boot. His ADP right now is running back 11. So he's going off the past 2 days in that Football Guys Championship around 2-4. They said last year he did the same thing. He's on Twitter saying he'll be fine. So I don't blame anybody who doesn't want to go the Kenyon Drake route. If you want to get Chase Edmonds, his ADP is in the 9th round right now. Boston Scott for Philadelphia is in the 11th round. So it's not super pricey yet on Chase Edmonds. It's not like, in years past. I remember Ben Tate. I always like to bring him up because people had to get him in like the 5th round because, if Arian Foster goes down, Ben Tate's going to win your league in the 5th.
Yeah.
We saw that never happen.
It was, actually it was the 7th and 8th round, which we thought was expensive back then. And now people do that in the 5th round with Kareem Hunt.
A guy that you might have been looking at in the 4th, 5th round is David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. He went down at practice on Wednesday with a groin injury. Reports from Ian Rappaport say he's only expected to miss about 2 to 4 weeks. All right, this is a groin. This is a running back. Who knows here? So the Bears open up with the Lions week 1. Now, we know Tariq Cohen, he's entrenched as a 3rd down back. He's not really built to handle anything between the tackles. So that leaves 2nd-year back Ryan Nall from Oregon State as a possible favorite to handle these early down work. Montgomery last year didn't miss a game, rushed for almost 900 yards, 6 touchdowns. Dwain, in your last update on PFF, you had him at running back 23. Where do you have him now, and how does this maybe change a strategy, knowing that Montgomery may not be available week 1?
It makes things really, really tricky, especially if you're drafting down towards picks 10, 11, and 12, because I don't blame anybody if they don't want to take Montgomery there now. And he was kind of the backup plan for Swift and for Cam Akers, right? If you couldn't get one of those two, you could still come back and get Swift. Now, the way we've been talking to folks about drafting basically 1 through 6, you're probably going to have 2 running backs, or at least 1 through 3. You're going to have 2 running backs in your first 3 picks. If you're picking, 4, 5, 6, you might, it depends on if James Conner, slides, to you still, then you might, have 2 running backs. But once you get past that, the running backs that we don't like and the receivers are just really the better option. Again, folks missed it last week. We talked a lot about opportunity costs. We talked about breaking points where, you would take an upside player like Jonathan Taylor. So if you missed that, go back and listen to that, and you'll understand that in the context of this conversation. But the Montgomery thing just makes it tricky because before he was just the backup plan, and now you're only down to 2 guys that are going in that 5th round. And we talked about this last week too, right? Don't make your plan based on just the best case scenario. Right. And so as margin, now your margins are, your margin for error is thinner. So what you have to ask yourself, Drake, is how do you feel about, that next group of running backs that are sitting there? I liked Montgomery because I felt really good about what his role was going to be. I felt really good about some regression to the mean around his yards per carry. And I thought he could even get a little bit more work in the passing game. So even though he had a terrible season and he could just suck, he's still a young player that we thought was going to be in a really solid volume situation. So now you got to pivot to Ronald Jones. You've got to pivot to, Raheem Mostert. You've got, you're not going to take Dobbins or anybody like that yet. So, it's really kind of like Mostert or Ronald Jones is really it.
I don't want to pivot to either of those guys as a running back 2.
Right. Well, yeah. So if you're drafting from the front end, that would be your running back 3. Right. And so that could potentially be okay. But if you're drafting from the back end of a draft, if you're avoiding running backs at the 2-3 term because or at the 3-4 term because you don't like them, then you're stuck staring at, do you want Ronald Jones the next round to be your RB2? And I get it. That's going to be tricky. That's going to be a tough thing. I would say he's next in line just because of the offense that he plays in, but I don't feel as good about his situation as I did, Montgomery's. I get why Jones is going where he is, and I think he's actually priced right. I just can't shake the feeling that it's going to be a 3-man backfield. I can't. My gut tells me if he was any good at all, last year, he would have taken more carries inside the 5. Yes, he got like 5, and people want to talk about how he scored on 5. What I care is who wanted which running back on the field. Bruce Arians didn't want Ronald Jones on the field in that situation, and he's not getting on the field in passing downs. It's going to be Dare or it's going to be, McCoy. So he needs to earn that, goal line, inside the 5 carry work, and he could because Keyshawn Vaughn hasn't asserted himself. But, if somebody's just getting some carries inside the 5 at practice and doing a little bit of this or that, it could really go unnoticed. I don't know how much we're going to hear about Keyshawn Vaughn, but he's definitely not making any noise, and he's falling down draft boards. So if Jones were to get those two components, he could pay off, right, at that pick. He would be fine. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Drake? Like, if you have to think about him versus Mostert, where are you at?
See, this is where when you're picking, if you know your draft is going to fall down this way and you're going to be staring at a guy like Mostert or Rojo as your RB2, I'm going to make sure if I'm in that back half that I'm going to get a couple of running backs early so that this guy is a flex player for me. My running back 3, I'm not comfortable going into a season. I don't care how great my running backs or my receivers turn out to be if those guys are my RB2, because I just don't think that they're going to have the touchdown opportunity. I think Tampa's going to throw the ball all over the place, and it wouldn't shock me if LaShawn McCoy all of a sudden gets a role because Arians doesn't think he's going to fumble and, he just trusts him being a veteran. Wouldn't shock me in the slightest. I'd actually probably rather take the upside of one of those rookies, and somebody in our chat room's asking us about that. You know, if you had the option of Jones or Mostert, or you could go with like Swift or Akers. Give me the rookies all day.
Well, I know, but what we're saying is the rookies are gone.
Yeah.
That's the point, right? I mean, that was our plan. You take Swift, you take Akers, and your backup is Montgomery. Now, if you're sitting down on the end, you may not get that, right? You're going to be sitting there crossing your fingers. And here's the thing on Montgomery. The groin injury really scares me, and it really could just be because of I can't help but I think, and Sigmund Bloom actually tweeted this, and that was the first thing I thought of, because I remember I was just starting to play fantasy football. I think it was my second year, and I drafted Fred Taylor in his second year with my first round pick, like pick 3 overall, and everybody was like, "What?" And I mean, I loved Fred Taylor. Named my team tailor-made, everything. In the preseason, it might have been early. Might have been early in the season. I think it was preseason though. He had a groin injury, and we come to find out later it was like complete, I think, detachment, like from the bone. So I don't know how bad Montgomery's injury is, but if you've ever had a groin injury, which I have, like, man, I've like retweaked that thing just like walking around and like, moving something, picking something up or it's, I don't know. So I just worry about that with Montgomery. I mean, he was already a guy that I liked the opportunity and I liked that he was young, but it's not like we were crazy about him, and just saying, hey, this guy's going to be a stud. And now he's going to have to deal with the injury. So I am worried. I think the thing to monitor is, do they end up signing someone? And if they don't sign someone in the next week, then I think we might start to say, okay, you can think about taking Montgomery. I just worry about it getting, reflared up, So, and I'm with you on Mostert. I think it's going to be a running back by committee.
What do you think
I
of
don't
Mark
see any
Ingram?
reason. I think Ingram's great, but like he doesn't give you much upside, right? And if Dobbins does press him for more work, Mark Ingram, he scored a ton of fantasy points last year on not that much work, and he's going to get less. He scored 5 receiving touchdowns on like 20 something catches. I mean, I love Mark Ingram, the player, and I think he's going to hold off J.K. Dobbins much better than people think based on Dobbins' draft cost right now. But I just don't like building my team around Ingram, Drake. I don't like building my plan around Ingram.
Right.
So it's a really tough spot because now you're sitting there at the end and you're like, I don't know if I want – I'm going to draft Miles Sanders. But you're thinking, I don't know if I want Miles Sanders. I don't know if I want, Kenyon Drake. I know the next guy we probably need to talk about is Joe Mixon. I mean, is he going to hold out? Now there's all this swirl around him. And so now literally the guys that you might have thought about just taking back to back down there, there's questions around all of them. Josh Jacobs, we've already covered Josh Jacobs and Nick Chubb and the issues they have. They're going to be lacking the pass targets that you really want from a top back. So right now it's almost like Jacobs is the guy that, at least he's healthy, and if the Raiders are better, he's going to get all the work inside the 5, and it does give you a body, right? He's not going to hold out. Nick Chubb, same thing. He comes with his warts, but he's going to play. And then I think Austin Eckler obviously is the next one that just needs to keep, moving up. Because
he's kind of the forgotten guy.
Yeah. We know that he's healthy though. And I mean, he just got paid. He's going to have a role. We're worried about this offense. So if you want to take 2 running backs, I just think it's tough to take 2 guys with all the risk, right? Like I wouldn't want to draft Miles Sanders and Kenyon Drake. I wouldn't want to draft Kenyon Drake and Joe Mixon. I wouldn't want to draft Miles Sanders and Joe Mixon like that. That would be concerning to me, especially if, you're drafting, and you only get to draft, say you're in your home league and you've got 1 draft. Like I wouldn't really feel good about that. Hey, even in these leagues where, I'll draft 20 of these teams, or whatever, there's still no value in that really. I mean, you've been getting those guys there for the whole preseason pretty much. Sanders has fallen a little bit with this injury, and he's the reason I like taking him too, Drake. That's the other reason that I'm willing to take him, is because he was jumping up to where he was consistently going around, round 1, pick 6, round 1, pick 7, sometimes pick 5. So it was tough to get him down, at pick 10, 11, and 12. So that's the other thought around Sanders. Now, if Derrick Henry falls to you, it's easy. You just take Derrick Henry and boom, move on. If Clyde Edwards-Helaire falls to you and you get lucky, boom, you take him, you're moving on. But the guys that are normally there, it's tough. So, and we're going to walk folks through a draft like this. And I'll be honest, I draft and do this stuff all the time. It was a freaking scary draft, man. I was just sitting here watching all this value go the opposite way of me. And I was looking at all the players going off the board and I was like, holy shit, this is a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I put myself through that for the hustle.
And we'll bring that draft up in a few minutes here when we get through the news. So let's talk about two guys who aren't necessarily hurt, but maybe their pocketbook is, and they're sad about that. So Joe Mixon, the Bengals star running back, hasn't practiced in recent days, and according to Tom Pelissero of NFL.com, is suffering from migraines. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the air quotes. This is sort of a new wrinkle because when the CBA was changed, now players don't hold out, they, quote, hold in. So they report to camp, but then they kind of don't show up and they have mysterious illnesses and they don't practice. And, we know what Mixon can do. Last year, he ran for 1,137 yards. He caught 35 balls on his way to finishing as RB17. So, Dwain, with this holdout, for whatever reason it is, and the fact that Gio Bernard is still lurking there as a touch stealer, what are your thoughts on Mixon, who's going off the board at the end of round 1?
I think he's another tough one. The holdout news is really, that's just an added wrinkle, So I get the hesitancy that could create, for folks as well. You don't want to look, nobody wants their first round pick to have, 30 questions hanging over their head. And that's what you're dealing with down at pick 10, 11, and 12 now. If you just stay heavy handed and go with the running backs that have typically been going there, it's a real challenge. And for Mixon, here's where I was starting to get to with Mixon. I don't like I like his offense. I think it's going to get better, but the Bengals are still going to lose a lot of games. They're going to trail in what's going to be a tough division. They've got some tough defenses to play against.
Very tough.
We've covered multiple times this year. They basically melded in the last half of the season last year. Yeah, they changed their run scheme some, but man, I went and looked at all that. They didn't run that much more power than even the first half of the season. They ran a few more power type, plays over the second half of the season versus the first half. And honestly, more of that was because they just ran the ball more. I think that they basically went into a shell. And in the games where they did pass all the time, Bernard was a real problem. Well, then, the report came out last week, I believe it was on CBS Sports, where the beat writer from the Bengals came out and said, hey, here's my big projection is that, Joe Mixon isn't getting all these catches that everybody thinks. They're going to Gio Bernard. Now, normally you might take something and say, oh, that's his big prediction. Take it with a grain of salt. But when it's actually already what happened last year, even though he didn't get the receptions, but he was on the field taking all those snaps, it's probably going to happen. And so now you're dealing with, the double questions, around Mixon. What I liked with Mixon, though, Drake, is out of all of these running backs, Mixon, Jacobs, and Chubb, I felt that if you were in a PPR and you just wanted to make this stance, it was probably okay because he's the one that's most likely to be able just to take over the passing down work because he's really good at it. And I don't know why they feel that they've got to get Gio Bernard involved. It's mind numbing. But I think he's a good enough receiver that he could discount, Bernard's touches, right? He can show enough that, he can get on the field and do those things too. Whereas it's not that Jacobs and Chubb are terrible, but Mixon's a guy that, he doesn't just have to be a guy that catches passes in the flat. He can do a lot more than that.
Yeah. Another running back who isn't injured, but some eyebrows were raised this week. Adam Schefter, we all know Shefty from ESPN, was on their draft marathon program a few nights ago. And he said to Matthew Berry, I believe, that he wouldn't take Dalvin Cook because there are possible holdout concerns. So that just raised eyebrows and red flags all over the fantasy industry. What say you, Mr. McFarland?
Well, here's what I say. push him down to 10 or 11 when I'm drafting 10th or 11th
Yeah,
because
really.
I feel better. At least his upside is so big. It's like, okay, I can go ahead and pull the trigger here. But yeah, I mean, it's another problem. I mean, Derrick Henry needs to go in front of Dalvin Cook now, whereas they were in a tier together. Now what you're looking at is McCaffrey, Barkley, Elliott, and Kamara and Henry. That should be the first 5 picks of a draft. If you want to go Michael Thomas after that, you can, and I totally get it. But if now with the way this running back situation is even murkier, if you just want to go ahead and pull the trigger on Clyde Edwards-Helaire right there at 6, go for it. Just do it. And then, for the folks sitting down at the end, your decision is going to turn into when Cook slides to you, do you do it? And I would. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do it because I'm going to make Alexander Mattison a priority. And so you hit on it earlier, Drake. If you take any of these running backs we've talked about, now Mixon's trickier because we don't know for sure what's going to happen, but you can get his cuff. I think his cuff is Travion Williams, and you can get him free, right? Because Rodney Anderson got cut. Gio's not going to get all that work. I think they're going to keep Gio in his role. So you can get the cuff super cheap. If you draft Kenyon Drake, you need to reach around for Chase Edmonds. If you're in a 12-man league, you need to take Chase Edmonds in the 9th. Don't try to wait till the 10th. You're going to have to take him in the 9th. That means you may have to pass on a CD Lamb. There's going to be a cost to it, but you've got to do it. And so you're going to have the same thing on Dalvin Cook. And he's trickier because Madison, with this recent news, is creeping back up again into the 8th round. He went in the 8th round of this draft. We're going to show you guys in just a few minutes. But Cook's upside is so huge that I still think that it's worth it. And what you have to do is, we talked about, roster construction last week. You have to plan now to take him in the 8th and figure out, what does that do to you? What does that do to you? And what does that mean you need to do before that? And what does that mean that you need to do after that? And I mean, we gave a great lesson on that last week. We talked through multiple examples. And so I want to let the people think for themselves on this. And actually, I would love to hear from some of you guys, how you're going to make that work. And let Drake and I know.
Put some comments in the chat on YouTube. There's a comment section right there. We'd love to hear how your drafts are going and what you think of it. And that's it's always fun to see when people start.
And the smaller your league gets, 8-man, 10-man versus 12-man, your odds get better and better, right, of getting the player. And that does go back to what you talked about last week, Drake. You got to know the other players in your league.
Mm-hmm.
So who's the guy in your league that just wants to, or girl that just really wants to kick you in the balls? You got to know that, because that's the person you're watching out for. I know who that person is in my league. He was in my Twitter feed last week, and he used to take Austin Eckler in front of me when I had Melvin Gordon multiple times, and now that's paid off huge for him. Mm-hmm. But it all started off with, I'm not letting Dwain have his handcuff. He used to do it to me when I had Arian Foster. He's the guy that would take Ben Tate. So, I mean, this guy's been doing this to me for years. So you got to know who that person is in your league, and maybe you don't have one. If you don't, great. Then you get to wait.
Become that guy then. It's funny. I think this year in home drafts, and man, our chat room here is really active tonight. So these guys are having a good time talking here. If you're watching us on YouTube or Periscope, it's pretty fun. But I think this year is going to be so running back heavy because people know that thirst. They haven't been paying attention, and they're going to just start pounding on that running back position. I think you're going to get so many great values at wide receiver, and especially guys that people really aren't paying attention to. We might hit on a few a little bit later. It's going to be incredible. I have a guy in my league doing today. My buddy, I'll give him a shout out, Jim Hartman, who is a Army veteran. The guy will ask for a military discount at the dollar store. Like, it doesn't matter where he's going. He's asking for the discount.
Well, to be fair, nothing costs $1 anymore at the dollar store.
But, hey,
it's like,
God bless you.
As long as it's rounded to $1, it works. This is $100, but it's rounded to the even dollar.
Guy texted me today, hey man, who are you looking at in our draft? I'm like, I picked 12th. We already know our positions. I'm like, I don't know who the hell is going to fall to me. I honestly think, knowing the guys, I think like Michael Thomas is going to fall to me, because everyone's just going to take it back. And he's like, yeah, just curious. He's at 6. And I go, Jim, I do a radio show every week where I tell America who I like. Like, it's no secret to go like, gee, who's Brian thinking of drafting at the end of this first round? Like, watch the show. But yeah, know the folks in your league, and know if they're going to start jumping on guys, like Josh Jacobs. We mentioned him earlier. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time on him. They just signed Theo Riddick. They keep saying Jacobs is going to catch more passes. It's nonsense. It's not going to happen. The guy's still going to nurse that shoulder injury that he's had for years. Any change with Josh Jacobs, you're just leaving him where he is.
Yeah, I think what's happened with Josh Jacobs is if you're scared off of Joe Mixon, if you're scared off of Kenyon Drake, he's climbing. So if you take Miles Sanders in the first and you come back in the second and you're like, I want safety with this pick, I think you're looking at Jacobs, Chubb, or Eckler if you want to go running back. I think you don't want to necessarily pair up necessarily. I liked Jacobs and Chubb more than Mixon to begin with. I get the argument, though, that some folks have, right, that, hey, he is good enough to take over the receiving down work. And I'm not going to argue because he is. It's just mind-numbing why the coaches don't do it.
Yeah.
So you can't assume rational coaching. But Jacobs, Chubb, and Mixon were all in the same tier, And so I've basically been, I'm fine with mixing them up down there and people can take the one they want. I think they all have the same limitation. But now Joe Mixon has an extra question. And I wish I would have known that when I was drafting last night. I didn't know about his extra question. I may be giving part of my first two picks away there. But I think if you want safety, it's Eckler, Chubb, and Jacobs. But they still have all the same issues that they had before. But the problem now is, you've got other running backs that have bigger issues.
Question in our chat room here from Justin to Dwayne. He says, Dwayne, are you higher on Connor in the third over DJ Moore, Thielen, or Allen Robinson?
We talked about this a little bit last week. I'm taking Connor in the third, and I love all those guys that we just named. They're really good. My thing on Connor is I like what I can get, coming back, with the receiver position. And sometimes, like I've had it work where Thielen's fallen back to me in the fourth. It depends on where you're picking and where you're getting Connor, right? If you're having to take Connor at the 3-2 or the 3-3, it's going to be tough, right? In a 12-man league to get Thielen, to fall back to you. In the draft board we showed last week, the guy that was picking fourth, Thielen fell back to him there. But that you don't see that, all the time, and Robinson's going to be gone. DJ Moore will be gone. But to your point, Drake, all the other receivers that are still there, you can still build out, a really good roster. The problem is if you pass Connor there, for me, then when's the next running back you want to take? I really don't want Akers or Swift as my RB2. The whole idea of the plan that we laid out last week is you're really creating a roster that can get better as the season goes. You don't have to start off week one playing DeAndre Swift the way we built that roster. You could start off playing 3 wide receiver, flexing a receiver, and whatever your league format is. I was an FFPC. I could start 4 receivers on that team week one and feel fine about it, or I could start 2 tight ends because it's tight end premium. You got to know your league scoring. But I believe that Connor is the guy that can score as much as or more than literally every other running back going in the second round. And he could easily be a first-round pick next year. Does he come with injury risk? Yes. Sure. Could his quarterback get hurt? Yes. But you're getting him in the third round. And so I feel that highly about Connor. He's a perfect fit for where he's at. I like their scheme. I like that he has a coach that's committed to him. And I'm just going to live with that risk. But that's also the other reason we're grabbing, Swift or Akers, in the third. I mean, if he misses a couple of games, we still got another person that hopefully by week 3 or 4, they're blowing up. But if Connor manages to stay healthy and all of a sudden Akers blows up and you have that plus Zeke Elliott and then all the receivers you stack around him, you're going to win your league. I mean, that's what's going to happen. You're going to win your league. So
that's what we're here for.
Yeah. So it's a really good question. Obviously the further Connor falls, the better. If you get him at 3.6, 3.5, which I still see happen, a lot, you're in even better position because then you could get a Thielen, you could get an AJ Brown, you could get, an Odell Beckham to fall back to you. So it gets even juicier because, and I talked about this last week. I like being at pick 7 in a 12-man league because the value coming back in the 4th and the value coming back in the 6th, you still get the premium of basically where the tiers cut off at receiver. You're still going to get one of those guys. You're still going to get one. Whereas if you're down, it picks 1, 2, or 3, especially in a 12 team, you're going to be much more challenged. They dry up right in front of you. Usually there might be one left, in the 4 hole or the 5 hole, we'll take them. And we've got our backup plans. We've talked about Robert Woods last week. He isn't as sexy, but I love Robert Woods this year, and he's an easy, pick in the late 4th round. And then you can turn around and you can take one of the young running backs, at the beginning of the 5th with Akers or Swift.
I was going to mention Akers or Swift here. Just quickly on those two. So Akers is getting talked up a lot because Darrell Henderson's missing time with a bad hamstring. He's run off the board, Akers, that is, in the Football Guys Players Championship over the past 2 days in the middle of round 5. So we talked about him being a building block for people who maybe want to grab a receiver or two in 3 and 4 and then get him in 5. And then also in Detroit, Kerryon Johnson came out and called himself a, quote, knee brace guy, which never sounds ideal for a running back at all. But Swift himself has missed a number of practices with what they're calling as a leg injury. So that's kind of a murky situation. We don't know what's going to happen there. Just before people walk into their draft win, I'm sure there's guys driving in their cars, listening to this right now, getting ready to draft. Dudes are going to be 58 White Claws deep, and they're not going to know who Cam Akers or DeAndre Swift are. So quick elevator speech on these two.
Well, I mean, essentially, you just have 2 running backs that are in what I would call they landed in the best spots to actually just take over and lead their backfields. So Akers lands with Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson, and now Darrell Henderson is hurt. And they're saying they hope he's ready for week 1. So that tells us that's a significant strain, that he's got on his hamstring, and that's going to be problematic for a guy that couldn't even get on the field last year. That's the thing with Henderson. It wasn't just that he played and wasn't good. Like he was inactive a lot. They just couldn't find a way to get the guy going. And so Malcolm Brown, are you really that worried about Malcolm Brown? I mean, we've been talking about Malcolm Brown for 3 years. What has Malcolm Brown done? Nothing. And
what can Malcolm Brown do for you?
Yeah, and here's the deal. You can still get Malcolm Brown late if you take Akers in the 5th. I mean, Malcolm Brown, most people have forgot about, and he's a great late round pick. And it's not bashing Brown, but I feel like if Akers is any good at all and they spend a 2nd round pick, they obviously like him, he could easily take over the backfield. So same thing with DeAndre Swift. He lands in a situation behind a guy that can't stay healthy. And Kerryon Johnson, I like Kerryon Johnson. I like the skill set. I liked him coming out. I was high on him last year, but the guy can't stay healthy. And like you said, he's wearing around a knee brace. They're managing his reps, all that kind of stuff. And now, Bo Scarborough's not practicing either. So that's what's helping out Swift a little bit for me is they may just be protecting him. I don't know, right? Because, Scarborough, he may not even make the team because he can't get on the field. And then, you've got Kerryon who has his own issues. So I still like Swift in the 5th. I mean, I think we've got to keep monitoring it. And like I said, Drake, there's going to be surprises come week 1 that we can't account for. I mean, maybe that could be one, but in the 5th round, I'm not backing off of Swift. I'm taking him. And what I'm hoping is he'll slide some more if people start getting worried about his injury. I just haven't seen that happen in a draft yet.
I think there's going to be a lot of guys in home leagues too, is because we know for a fact, being in this industry, that the casual fan out there is slow to return right now. So they're going to be popping in, and maybe they're doing their drafts online because of COVID, they can't do their drafts in person. They're looking at whatever ranking is on Yahoo or ESPN, and they don't know who the guys are, and they kind of just pass right over them. And our listeners are going to get value. One guy maybe you can get who your league mates might not know about is Damian Harris of the New England Patriots. He's seeing first-team work because Sony Michel has been out a while. Now, Michel did return today from an injury, but he's missed damn near most of camp. So, Dwain, thoughts on the Alabama second-year product? We still have James White there. I guess Rex Burkhead is mopping floors, or, he has pictures of Bob Kraft in yet another compromising position, he's still on the team. So what are we thinking here with Damian Harris? Is this the sleeper to win your league late?
Yeah, I mean, I think he could be. But again, what do we look for? We just look for the steady kind of, every piece of data that's coming in, is just one piece of data. But when it just continues to stack up over time, and you're not just recounting the same piece of data, you're truly hearing, it's building. And that's what's happening with Damian Harris right now. I mean, he's putting together one good thing after another. And based on what I'm reading, I think it's probably his job. I think Sony Michel is the backup at this point. I think Michel's going to work in, but Harris has looked so good, and they like his ability in the passing game. And Sony Michel doesn't have that. So if they have a guy that they think can do everything Michel can by pounding inside, between the tackles, and they also think that it's a guy that can bring a little more juice than Michel and also work in the passing game, that makes them multidimensional when he's on the field. It makes them less predictable.
Right.
And so I think that Damian Harris has done everything that he needs to do. He's still going to be in a running back by committee because, you're not going to get rid of James White, and there were reports today that, basically, in their 11-on-11 drills, that's the first guy Cam Newton's looking for is James White. It's James White. So he's still going to be involved. But if the Patriots offense can get going, there's some touchdown upside for Damian Harris. There's some big play upside. There's a chance, that he gets, he could see 225 carries, maybe catch 30, 40 balls, maybe score you 6-7 touchdowns, and I mean, he could surprise and do more, but I think he's positioned himself that's how I'm thinking of him now. I'm thinking of him as a guy that's probably in line for 200 touches, and he could potentially do more.
Damian Harris, according to our good friend Darren Armani, Fantasy Mojo, give him a follow on Twitter. The Football Guys Players Championship over the last 2 nights, some of the best data in the business. And Damian Harris is going off the board. The earliest he came off was the 10th pick of the 7th round. On average, he's going as the last pick of the 9th round. So if you get him at the end of the 9th, start of the 10th, boy, and you can sit on that lottery ticket, and it might be a guy you can put in there as a flex, and you've got all those bullets you fired the 8-9 rounds beforehand, you'll be sitting pretty with Damian Harris.
Yeah, I think he's a priority in that range you just talked about. Some people are still, I think, they're not reacting quick enough, and they're still thinking they're going to get him in the 11th or 12th round. That's over. That's past. It isn't happening anymore.
It's like, you think you're going to get Dwain to come on your show for free? No, you got to pay the upfront fee to his manager, to me. They slide in my DMs. Yeah.
And my manager never sends me the check. He just keeps it.
So this is the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com. He is Dwain McFarland of Pro Football Focus and EstablishTheRun.com. You got anything fun coming out soon over at PFF?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing, all the writers have done this, My Guys piece. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be doing, a My Guys piece, but I'm also going to I'm going to intertwine it with some more of these drafts that I'm going to be doing, over the weekend, and just talking about, how the strategy may be evolving, what are some other potential things that I'm seeing outside of what we've been doing already. I can't, I share a ton on the show. I have to keep a little bit, that I hold back for some of the articles that I'm doing. But I mean, being transparent, we share a ton, on the show. So it's, but there's other things that I'm digging more into and even researching, further. And then I'm always looking at what, other really smart players are doing. So I've seen a few things over the last couple of drafts I've done where I'm like, I need to go back and look at that. I need to think about that again. That person did that, and I know that they're really good at fantasy football. So I want to go, what am I not seeing that they're seeing? And sometimes there's nothing, and then sometimes there is something. So I'm looking at a lot of things like that could make their way into that article. So it's essentially going to be my last draft prep piece, for the season. And it'll be getting folks for basically Labor Day weekend.
A lot of our listeners always hit us up and they go, hey, where can we get Dwain's tiers? Where can we get his rankings? I want to follow what he tells me on the podcast. So what can you tell those folks? Where can they find it?
Yeah, you get it all at pff.com. My tiers, I would put them up against, and I would put them up against anybody's in the industry. I mean, these are 5 to 10,000 word articles. You don't have to read everything, but everything you would want to know about that player is right there about them within the tier. So if you just want the list of the tiers, great. I've got it set up where you can scroll and just see the names, and that's all you care about. Fine with me. But if you want to know why I put them in the tier, then you can scroll down, or why I don't have them in the tier, and maybe you disagree with me. But I give you basically my thought process, and it's loaded. It's loaded with data that you can't get anywhere else but PFF. So that's the other awesome thing. And that's,
and you update the tiers. Some guys may not.
I update the tiers. And I actually do have to go back in and update them for this weekend. But I'm updating the rankings all the time. I'm updating the rankings at least twice, a week, and I'm making sure that they're ready to rock, by Friday, evening. So people going in, if you got a Friday night draft, they're going to be ready. If you've got a Saturday draft, they're going to be ready. And any news that's coming in on the weekend during the drafts, I'm adjusting I'll adjust my rankings. I'm doing all that. I may not be able to get over, and because we have editors that have to go in and move things around in a tier article. So if you want my latest updates, I would go always to the rankings, because that's the easiest. I can quickly get them done. I don't have to wait, because our editors, they have a ton of stuff, a lot of content that they're having to edit. So when I send my edits over for tiers, it goes into the line, right? It has to be in the queue. So sometimes on the weekend, they can't get to as much of that. So if you're on the weekend looking for the freshest view, you can have my tiers with you, but then you can also look at my rankings, and you can see, and you can export that. So if you want to just if you want to be able to, look at it, and then you can just, put my newest one right next to it, and you can see, which guys, have moved. So you can have that. And there are cheat sheets, man. There's all sorts of stuff. Like, there's so much stuff on there. I mean, you don't just have to go to the rankings. There's a cheat sheet that you can print off. Whenever you're looking at the rankings, there's a little drop down. You just hit the cheat sheet, and there's a version of that cheat sheet that actually will show you who to pick by round. So it's kind of like it's basically tiered by rounds. So basically, we'll show you all the players at all the positions that I would be willing to take in that round based on my rankings.
We just got a Facebook like from our pal Bob Harris, Football Diehards. If you guys are looking for a magazine out there, Bob does great work with Football Diehard stuff. We got to get him on the show. He's just like the godfather of fantasy football. So, Bob, if you're out there watching, hello, my friend. You got to hang out with him at the Kings Classic last year. Good dude. All right, Dwayne, let's hit some wide receivers real quick here. Tyrell Williams of the Las Vegas Raiders has a torn labrum in his shoulder, but he's going to try and tough it out, okay? The story out there is he had one of these, I believe, in college, and he still had nearly 1,000 yards that season. You might also know George Kittle's played through this the last 2 years. Alshon Jeffrey, the Super Bowl year for the Eagles, had the same thing. But Tyrell's trying to fight off rookie Brian Edwards for snaps at the X. So, Dwayne, my question to you, let's say Williams is out. Do we even care about Edwards? Because you've got Derek Carr, who's not trying to push the ball down the field. They added Henry Ruggs to play kind of the Z and run around underneath. You've got Darren Waller at tight end. You got the slot machine Hunter Renfrow. Is this just a lot of Twitter hype for something that's not going to pan out?
No.
Oh.
No. You should move. Brian Edwards is going too late. He shouldn't be going in the 16th and 15th round. That's dumb. He should be going basically right after the other rookies go. Once the Railer, Ruggs, all those guys are gone, he's basically fair game from any point on from there, because he's already been showing out. He was well thought of in the draftnik, community. He's a guy that hits a lot of the, check boxes for a lot of the, the dynasty guru folks, right? About breakout age and all these other things. So I'm drafting him often, you don't have to take him, that early, but you can prioritize him. And I think with Tyrell Williams having it just opens the door a little bit more, Drake. We're already hearing the guy's going to be getting on the field. And now Tyrell Williams is hurt, and maybe he can play through it. But I mean, Edwards is already, he's right there. He's already nipping at his heels. Brian Edwards is a priority wide receiver, especially in deeper leagues where you should be. I'm scooping him up. I don't let him get to the 15th. I just make sure I grab him in the 13th or 14th if it matches, what I want to do with my roster.
There you go. How about Big Mike Williams? He is the Chargers wide receiver, and he has a sprained shoulder. Hurt that on Sunday at practice and could be out about a month, according to reports. This is a low-octane passing offense, Dwayne. You got Tyrod Taylor under center. They're looking to pound the rock this year. Last year, Mike averaged, and I have to slow down when I say this, he averaged 20.4 yards per reception last year. The in-house options are a speedster, a kid named Jalen Guyton, and a rookie named Joe Reed. What do we know about these kids, and are either worth a flyer in the deepest league?
In the very deepest, like when I say like very, very deep, that's like your last round pick and like a 25 rounder, or maybe you're in a best ball and, it's a 30 rounder and you're just throwing darts at the end. I think you can look at those guys, but he's eventually going to be back. I think all they're going to look for, Joe Reed's not going to be the guy to replace him. They've already said that that's not going to be his role, and they really do like Reed. But I think they see him more as a guy that can work, the underneath, type stuff. He's not, that vertical stretch the field X type of player. I think that's going to be Guyton, and there could be a little magic there. I mean, Tyrod, if there's something Tyrod does really well is he's got nice touch, on the deep ball. He's hooked up with Sammy Watkins, and really Sammy Watkins' best year ever was with Tyrod Taylor, and it was going deep, right? Not working underneath like Sammy does a lot now. So late, but they're not in a typical draft. Those guys you just leave on the waiver wire. I think, and the offense is still going to be fine. I mean, you still have, Hunter Henry, you're still going to have Keenan Allen. You still got Eckler working underneath. The thing Williams really did is he stretches things out, so all that underneath stuff works, right? He's the guy pushing the top off the defense. And so a guy like Guyton, they just need him to prove for however many weeks that, Williams is out, that he can be a deep threat, which just means they need to take a couple of shots at him. He may catch a deep ball. He may score a long touchdown. But the main thing that we want is he just shows enough to let the rest of the offense still be able to function, because that's a huge advantage when you have a guy like Mike Williams that can demand that attention, because as soon as you don't pay attention, defenses know that he can make you pay. So you need to have that element to your offense. Drake, you saw what happens when you don't have that. I mean, how the Eagles became so compressed, right? And everybody's just sitting on every route.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you don't have a Mike Williams. So just it's a bigger thing for their offense overall, right? That they need to get Williams back.
In home leagues, names matter. Maybe if you're playing in a sharp league, you're not as into the quarterbacks and you're not worried about the big names. But when you're drinking in a garage with just your buddies from college or the neighborhood or at the firehouse or wherever you do drafts, names matter. And a name that people in your league are going to know this year is AJ Green. Now, he's back. He's working back into practice. He's got this bad foot, but he's out on the field now. We want some pieces of this Joe Burrow-led offense. Should we spend a 7th-round pick on AJ Green, or maybe just bite the bullet a hair earlier and take Tyler Boyd, who we know is productive and healthy?
Yeah, it's a roster construction thing. I mean, at that point, what does your roster look like? What are you going for? If you're going for upside, it's still AJ Green. If you're going for the guy that's most likely to finish the season with more points, it's Tyler Boyd. But Green still gives you that range of outcomes that gives you, he could score 10 touchdowns kind of thing if their offense was really able to get going. I think he's probably going to, if he's healthy, he'll score 7 or 8. He'll be the primary target, down in that area. Is he going to put up, 1,200 yards like he used to? Probably not. I don't think so. But I think the upside with AJ Green comes with touchdowns, and he could surprise us. He could have a 1,200 yard season. He may still have that in him, but to your point, it's just, can he get his legs right, man? His legs just haven't been right for 3 or 4 years now. The last time we saw him fully healthy, he was still dominant. So it'll be what I want to see from AJ Green, Drake, over the next couple of weeks. I want to hear nothing. That's what I want. I want to hear nothing, because he's back practicing. If it's no news is good news for AJ Green. So if he can stay healthy for these 2 weeks, great. You're taking on some risk with it. But Tyler Boyd, I mean, if you had to place a bet in Vegas, knowing all factors, who's going to lead the Bengals in receptions? It's Tyler Boyd. It's an easy bet, right? That's the guy you're going to put your money down on. So to me, like, you're getting Boyd in the 7th round. Sometimes he goes in the 6th. I mean, he doesn't have 100 ball upside like he did when he was getting stuff funneled to him, but he's going to gain some efficiency having these other guys on the field. I mean, he could still catch, 80 balls. He could still catch 85 balls, give you 1,000 yards, give you 4 or 5 touchdowns. I mean, in the 7th round, I mean, as your wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, I mean, there's worse things you can do than Tyler Boyd.
I've been on record saying I don't like receivers who have foot and ankle issues. And like AJ Green, Deebo Samuel has a foot issue. Wide receivers are falling like dollars at strip clubs at the moment. They're just like signing guys off the street. I think Kevin White from West Virginia just got brought in today. So Deebo, the word is, though, he's back and he could be possibly there for the season opener. Brandon Ayuk, he's banged up with a hamstring. We don't know if he's going to be back in a month or not. So Deebo's ADP is the end of the 8th round right now. Are you pulling the trigger on him, or are you worried?
He's moved up too much. The window to buy. So if you draft multiple teams, you play the news cycles, right? It's just like the stock market. You buy on the dips. You don't buy on the peaks. There's going to be another piece of news come out around Deebo Samuel. I guarantee it almost in the next week or so, where it's, he's running, but they're really wanting to be precautious. And he's probably not going to play the first month. I mean, these reporters are looking for something to write right now.
We're at the mercy. You and I talked about it off air. This is the most, year you've ever had to depend on beat reporters. And these teams are acting as if the Bills just fired Chris Murphy, the guy's name is, a guy that worked for years covering them. These teams are out of their minds trying to keep everything so secret. But meanwhile, fantasy football is driving the NFL. It's driving fan interest, and they're not giving information. It doesn't make sense. It's counterproductive. But I digress. We're trying to find good stuff for beat reporters.
It's an unprecedented situation. And so the teams know what the loopholes are, and they all want to have an edge. And once one of them does it, because if you're a coach, I get it. Fans, and we know what we want, and I agree that fantasy is huge for the NFL. But if you're the coach and you see, oh, well, this team isn't sharing anything. They're not sharing depth charts. They're not letting the media see X, Y, Z. Well, as a coach, you want to maintain as much of an edge as you can as well. You don't want to give an edge anywhere. So once one team does it, I see why the rest try. I guarantee you every coach has asked for it. It's up to the ownership and, the rest of the team, who's running the organization as to if that's something they're going to do or not, or they're running a business. So they may say, hell no, I want all the coverage because, that keeps us in the news. So, I mean, it can cut both ways. It's a matter of the way organizations are ran. Lastly, on Deebo Samuel at that high, he was going in the 10th, for a bit, and I liked him there because I can take him, put him on the roster, see what happens, see what news comes out, just kind of, let it hang out and know that, I've got some upside, maybe come week 4, come week 5. I think the last thing we want to see from Deebo Samuel, Drake, is I don't want him to rush him back.
Players always think they can worry about faster than they can.
Yeah. And some players can. But it's like you said, the foot injury is scary. The Jones fracture, I just hope they let him get all the way healed. And I would say that means him missing probably, and I'm not a doctor, but I mean, it's going to be better if he misses, 4 or 5 games and then you can get Deebo back. And if he misses 4 or 5 games, that makes him not worth an 8th round pick. If they're going to rush him back and he's going to get hurt again, that makes him, and an 8th isn't terrible. I mean, the problem is I just like other guys in the 8th. I'm not taking Deebo Samuel over CeeDee Lamb. Are you crazy? I'm not doing that. So that's, again, if Deebo hadn't been hurt, which I hate, he would have been, a player we were targeting in the 5th or 6th round of these drafts.
Let's get a little rapid fire here on some tight ends. Chris Herndon is a guy who's shooting up draft boards because of the fact that there's just nobody else in New York. All right. There's all the running backs that Adam Gase hates. There's Jamison Crowder, who's criminally undervalued all the time. And then you've got Perriman and Mims, who are kind of banged up on the outside. And then, here's Chris Herndon, who, just all by himself on 56 targets 2 years ago, caught 39 balls in 12 games. So what are your thoughts on Herndon? I know our pal Evan Silva moved him up to tight end 10 in his rankings over the week.
Yeah, I've moved him way up as well. I mean, essentially right now I'm thinking of him. He's the most likely guy to be the number 2 target on the team behind Jamison Crowder. So I think that's where he's at. I think, because the Perriman injury, is really opening, that door, for him. And I haven't looked at the latest on Perriman. I don't know if he practiced today, but I know he was out with a knee. Before I was kind of looking at it, okay, it could be Herndon, it could be Perriman, maybe Mims does something. Well, then, Mims he's gone. Chris Hogan is probably going to start the year outside at this point because Mims has just missed too much time, for being a rookie that a lot of people thought was, raw in some ways coming into the league anyway. He's less raw than what people think in certain aspects of his game. But at this point, and if Perriman's missing practice too, and we know how important, that being on the same page with your quarterback is, it's just huge, and so when you didn't have all the mini camps, you didn't get to do all the other things. I know they try to get together as much as they can. Every rep is that much more important. And, Perriman's missing out on that now. And, Mims has been missing out on it for, like 2 weeks now. So I think that it's natural to think that Herndon could be as high as the number 2 target on the team. And I think he does belong in the, top 12. I mean, you could put him just outside the top 12, but he's right there, in that range, of guys, that are going, and in most leagues, those guys that are going in the 9th, 10th, and 11th round where people have waited a bit, right, to get their tight end.
If you're really waiting, we got a couple of names for you. At the Hustle, we like to dig deep. And when we do our waiver wire shows during the year, and, if you're new to the show, you'll love our shows on Tuesdays and you get them early Wednesday on iTunes or whatever. And we dig deep for free agents, man. We're not just giving you the names you could see anywhere. Here's a couple of tight ends for you. And I want Dwain to speak to them. Logan Thomas of the Washington football team, caught myself. Logan Thomas, Robert Tonyan of the Packers, Devin Asiasi of the Patriots.
Yeah, I think all of those guys, Logan Thomas is a guy that, he played quarterback in college. So he's been making this transition to tight end for a while, but he keeps hanging around and he keeps getting a little bit better every year. And so it's actually just kind of a cool story. This guy's just stuck with it. He's an athlete. And he's just now learned the position essentially. And with Washington, we know that they need somebody to step up. So that's really the thing there. You can get him super late. But outside of McLaurin, everything's kind of wide open. Like we like, Steven Sims. We like, Antonio Gibson, but we don't know yet who's going to be that other person to step up. And it could be no one, right? It could be, it's just kind of spread around all of them. Maybe none of them are good enough, but there's an opportunity at least there. And it's a player that has managed to stick around. Think how many players coming in and out of the league, that people have high hopes for, and they're just gone in 2 years. This is a guy that could have easily been written off, right? So he's doing something right that coaches like. He is an athletic, body. He's a big body. They need that down inside the red zone and inside, the 5. I think that's where he could really potentially come through, right, for them, is that could be the role that he plays. He could be the guy that, sees quite a bit of the work. Now we are talking about Washington. I don't expect their offense to really be that good. But when they are down in that range, I think Logan Thomas could become, the top guy. As far as Asiasi goes, it's again, like I know he wasn't out on the field, I believe, today with, the starters. So I don't know if he was hurt or if he was just setting out of practice. I don't know. I haven't been able to follow back up on it. But up until that, the consistent reports again, right? He's blocking well. Cam Newton's looking for him often. He'd been running with the first team offense. And now rookie tight ends normally are really hard. It's very rare, right, that one would hit. But he goes super late. If you're in a deep league, he's a guy that you can still get. And then, Tanyan has just been making noise. He's kind of similar to Logan Thomas. He's hung around a little bit, but he's a tight end that can move. He's a tight end that can create some mismatches, and he's really putting pressure on Jay Sternberger. Right now, I would say it sounds like, Tanyan may be gaining the upper hand, and they could just rotate those guys. The other one is Tyler Eifert, because Josh Oliver, was injured, and so really that leaves him as the only tight end left there. And supposedly he and Minshew. Hey, I'm just saying, super late. Tyler Eifert.
Well, if you take Minshew in the first round for that free Bud Light, he's got to throw to somebody.
Exactly. You got to stack somebody with him. So you stack Chark and Eifert. So it's just some names, man. Tight end, it's like we're getting some new names every day, right? Of guys that can go that you could be getting later.
And I have to show this here. My 40th birthday was last week, and I was talking to guys on Twitter. And the wrestling fans out there, I have to give a shout out to my wife, who's literally like in the room next door doing laundry. Dwayne, how sick is this for a 40th birthday present? A WWF, not E, an F Winged Eagle title belt. Super sick. My wife got this for me. It just
that is awesome.
Mail yesterday.
I bet you were so juiced about that, Drake. You love your wrestling.
Yes.
You're always every meme, Drake. I do memes, in Tombstone. Drake does them in wrestling.
You have to clutch it too, like Shawn Michaels, like it's the boyhood dream has just been realized. That's a whole WrestleMania thing, beating Bret Hart and whatnot. But hey, for all the wrestling nerds out there, shout out to my wife. Shout out to your wife for letting you do 8,000 FFPC drafts. Because without it, we wouldn't have any content for the show. I'm putting up here, if you're watching us on YouTube, a draft that Dwain did a night or so ago from the 12 hole. Okay. You'll see if you're watching here, he's got his little DMC logo. Now, this is a tight end premium, correct?
Yeah. So the format here is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 2 flex. It's a PPR tight end premium. So tight ends get 1.5 points per reception. So the 2 flex spots is really key because you will see people take 3 runners in a row. And that's why, because they can play all 3. Sometimes you'll see folks take 4. So it's a really interesting format. There's also a kicker, and a defense. But it's not funny
egregious. Looking at it right now as a casual observer, you have Kelsey, Kittle go in the first. All right, it's tight end premium. That Ertz in the second. But I can't wait for people who want to take a tight end early. Like, this is how your build might go. So pay attention to those folks.
What you'll notice is typically a tight end is going to go in the first round, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll see 2 go, but once Ertz doesn't normally go that early. He just doesn't. Andrews occasionally will because people like his upside. But Ertz and Andrews are usually 3rd round picks. Kelsey and Kittle are usually 1st and 2nd round picks. And then after that, it kind of starts to turn into more like a normal draft. And it's not like that every year. Every year is a little different. It depends on how people feel, about the tight ends. But we talked about that a little bit last week, that middle tier. It's like, do you have anybody that you have conviction around? Probably not. Well, a lot of other people don't either. And that's why that tier falls. I actually like Waller a lot. I don't think he's really in danger of, just falling off the face of the earth. We've got really young players that are adding around him. I still like him a lot. I think he could easily get 22, 23, 24% of the targets on the team. I want to say he was at 21% per game in the games that he played fully last year. So I like Waller, huge run after the catch guy, but that's not really the point here. He falls like he does in normal drafts, in this format. So this is what we talked about last week, Drake. What if you're sitting down at the end and I entered a draft and guess where I landed? I landed at the end. So it's like we showed last week a pick at 1-3. We didn't really talk much about my draft at 1-6. We can come back and do that another time if people, want to hear more about a middle draft. But it worked out good, for the audience's sake. I don't know how well it worked out for me, but I didn't just take the tight end because I was just trying to do it for the show. I really tried to think about how do I want to build this team, period. And let it go from there. But in a tight end premium, once it got to me, and notice, Drake, So I'm at pick 12. Look where Davante Adams went.
Wow. Yeah,
Pick
what do you
8.
7?
That's
7,
pick
8?
Yeah. It's pick 8. So what's happening, right? People are getting nervous. That's where Miles Sanders used to go. They're like, screw it. Give me Davante Adams. Adams was falling into the second round often, and he still will. But people get nervous about these players that have injury. Now, Derrick Henry, like I was sitting there salivating. I was like, I've learned to not like let myself get overexcited. I was just thinking, man, give me Henry. And I was going to take Sanders if he made it, just because, again, you can't normally get him there. And so if I can get him, with the 12th pick, and I compare him with a guy like Kittle, that's what I wanted to do. But you notice, so Michael Thomas went as soon as when this draft happened, the Dalvin Cook thing wasn't as widely spread, right? This whole thing with Schefter. Some people may not have seen that news yet. It was out there. But again, 24-hour news cycle hadn't happened yet on it. So Michael Thomas was the safe pick for the 6 hole. Then you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire as the 7th pick. And honestly, I'm fine. And I mentioned it earlier, but I saw a question in the chat room. Why Edwards-Helaire? Why is he okay so high? Well, I wrote an article about it at Pro Football Focus where I literally go into every aspect of it. I cover every running back basically that Reed has had. I cover what the roles have been. I cover what kind of offense they've had. I've covered, what kind of fantasy points they got. I mean, I cover Edwards-Helaire. What kind of scheme did he play in college? He was the number 1 inside zone runner in the nation. What kind of scheme does he land in Kansas City? An inside zone running team. And I call out the warts too, potentially with Helaire, and all of it factored in. Yes, Edwards-Helaire is a first-round pick, period. And he deserves to go ahead of Miles Sanders. He should go ahead of Kenyon Drake now. He should go ahead of Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb. All these guys that he went in front of in this draft, he belongs in front of. But what you notice after that, Drake, people got kind of safe. Like it's like Adams went. Then Kelsey went. Before we used to see Sanders go up there. Sometimes you'd see Kenyon Drake go up there. Joe Mixon used to go in the first round, at the end of the first round. And so people started passing on this. And so Derrick Henry went at the 11 hole, the 10. Miles Sanders went at the 11. And so I went with, in this format, I went with Kittle because I feel like that gave me the biggest differentiation versus my competition. And I went with Mixon. And I didn't like the Mixon thing, but and I thought about going Julio, but it's what you said. I thought about, okay, David Montgomery's hurt, so I don't really want to pick him in the 5th. He's probably going to fall. That means I'm only going to have Akers and DeAndre Swift available, or I could be looking at Ronald Jones, like if I just had to. And so I was like, I have to have one of these guys. So, I mean, it could have been Jacobs. It could have been Chubb. It could have been Eckler. For me, I was mixing it up a little bit here. I don't own much Mixon. So I was just kind of buying in on, the news cycle and hoping that it's wrong because, he'll make it down here some, but he also goes ahead of this. So I paired Kittle with Mixon, thinking ahead.
I like that. There's a lot of guys, Dwayne, and I'm one of them. I'm drafting in my home league at 12, and I want to differentiate. Do I want the 10th or 11th best running back? Or maybe I can say, hey, give me the best damn tight end, and I'll have an edge over my buddies that way. So there's going to be a lot of guys with the same strategy.
And I think what makes it, say you wanted to go tight end and receiver there, what makes it tough for me, Drake, is I don't want Le'Veon Bell. I don't want, Melvin Gordon in the 3rd round. I don't want those guys in the 3rd round. I don't want Todd Gurley, who fell to the 5th in this thing. Gurley's worth it, at that point. Like I don't catch falling knives, but like Gurley at 5'2", if there's a chance to put him on your roster, that's where you're going to do it. Right.
10 at 2 is a 2 at 10 sometime, or however that line goes.
Right. So I mean, for me, when I think about that, again, I talked about this last week, roster construction isn't just, an excuse to say, oh, I want upside or, oh, I want floor. That's part of it, but it's really about planning out. What is that going to look like? And I knew if I passed Mixon, any one of those running backs, it could have even been Drake. It could have been Jacobs. It could have been Chubb, whoever the audience wants to insert, because they're all kind of jumbled at this point. They all have their own questions. I didn't feel comfortable not taking at least one because I didn't want to be forced to feel like, holy crap, I got to take one of these guys I don't like. I don't ever want to be in that position because I love the value at receiver in rounds 3 and 4. So that's the way I build my drafts. So just for the audiences that are listening, after I take Mixon, Jacobs goes, Drake goes, Julio Jones is gone. The guy in the 6 hole got Tyreek Hill to fall back to him there, which is pretty solid. You don't always see that with Tyreek Hill. So he started with Michael Thomas and Tyreek Hill. Then Aaron Jones goes. You already mentioned Zach Ertz went in the 2nd because it's tight end premium. Godwin goes. And then the turn, Drake. And if you see that little asterisk there, I know you can't see it if you're listening to us on the podcast, but that means auto picks. And that's not the order that, the FFPC has those players in. This guy literally either had his queue up and walked away or got logged out and it auto picked these 2 players because he made his first pick. He made the first pick of Christian McCaffrey. It wasn't an auto pick. So either he had them in his queue and he didn't have his queue finished and he lost connection or something, and it took these 2 players for him. But then when I looked at the rest of the draft, I thought, hell, he might have queued them up and walked away intentionally saying, I know I'm getting these 2 guys. But it's David Johnson and DeAndre Swift. That's when I immediately knew right then, Drake. I'm like, this is gonna suck. I had to already start thinking ahead of like, what am I gonna do different? How am I going to be aggressive? Because when this kind of thing happens, my nature
and it will in your home league with guys not paying attention all year. It will.
Yeah. And so when I get in this situation, my reaction is I get hyper aggressive. Like I go back to my roots, like as a poker player. If I'm in a position of feeling uncomfortable, I want to make everyone else around me feel uncomfortable, as well. And so I just started planning ahead. I'm like, okay, if Ronald Jones makes it to me in the 5th or Cam Akers, I'll do it. Obviously, I would love to have Akers. I knew Swift's off the table now, but I didn't want Montgomery. I'm scared, of that injury. I need more information. So I already basically decided in my mind, if Akers or Jones are gone, I'm going to keep going receiver. So it got back to me, and notice. So after Swift goes, Chris Carson goes. That's earlier than he normally goes. And now I'm like, okay, here it goes. Like the run, is on. And it did happen. Le'Veon Bell, Leonard Fournette, Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon. And I'm okay with all that because I didn't want to draft them anyway. The problem is, Drake, like I've got a nice tier of receivers that I really love. Now I've got DJ Moore, Adam Thielen, and Allen Robinson at the top of it. So I was just sitting there hoping, and it was getting closer and closer. I was like, holy crap, I'm going to get 2 of these 3, which I haven't been able to do that very often, to be honest. I've not got to pair DJ Moore with Adam Thielen yet. I've not paired DJ Moore with Allen Robinson yet. I have paired Robinson and Thielen one time. So I was excited about that. That's what I was looking at. And I was like, I literally made those 2 picks, Drake, in like 5 seconds. The guy sat in front of me, like sitting there. He's like, Galladay at the last second. And I literally went, more Thielen, done. And that was with Lamar Jackson sitting there. I could have had Lamar Jackson. If I ever wanted to draft him this year, I could have done it. So people, if you ask me about my convictions around waiting on a quarterback, it's not just me being stubborn. I love several other trigger points. You can go back and listen to last week's show. There are just other quarterbacks that I really like that go quite a bit later than Lamar Jackson. If I were to do it, though, that would have been where, right? And I also looked at my build at that point. I'm like, okay, I've got Kittle, I've got Mixon. In this kind of tournament, how rare is it going to be that someone gets to pair Kittle, Mixon, and Lamar Jackson? It's probably pretty rare to get those together. I would guess there's only a few teams that have done it. So that's the only part that passed through my mind. And as soon as Mahomes went, I was already going through the scenario in my head of, okay, how would this differentiate my roster in this? And so if folks say, hey, in this, they're wondering like, what do you mean? What kind of format? So in this league, what you want to do is you want to win your league or score the most points in your league, and you make your money off of that. But then everybody that wins their league or scores the most points in their league then go into a playoff race for weeks 14, 15, and 16. Your average points for the season is your week 1 score. And then what you score each week from there on out, and waivers and all of that is locked. What you score each week from there out, whoever scores the most points in that race, the first place winner will get $500,000. So that's where I finished in the top 5, 3 times in like the last 7 years is in that race. So when you hear, Drake like do my Rocky entrance last week, which all my buddies at my home draft literally came in this last weekend and they were all like, dude, they were like, Drake's freaking awesome. I mean, they just loved your intro. And they're all like, they're all like, they were all giving me a hard time about it. But anyway, so I had already kind of looked at it and I was like, look, if I can get 2 of Moore, Thielen, and Robinson, I'm still doing it. If I can't get 2 of those, that was where I was willing. I might pull the trigger on Jackson just to create a different kind of build. So that's what I mean when I hear that. But look, Drake, look at how much receiver value still kept going back the other way. So after
there wasn't
a
running back taken in the 4th round.
Yeah.
Melvin Gordon was the last
Allen
running back
Robinson
taken.
goes after I pick. Odell Beckham at 4-3. Then Lamar Jackson at 4-4. Mike Evans at 4-5.
Wow.
Cooper Kupp, that's a little bit of a reach. Amari Cooper, that's about where he goes. Calvin Ridley, that's a little bit of value on him. That's before DK Metcalf goes at, we're back down to the other side. Now we're at pick 9 in the 4th round. AJ Brown next. That's about where he goes. Robert Woods. That's about, I take him there quite often. Keenan Allen was a reach by the same guy that reached for David Johnson and DeAndre Swift. He's normally.
I know who that guy is, by the way. There's only one man with balls to take those running backs, and he was in our all-star best ball draft, and it's Frank Balboni.
Balboni, he's back.
Our fans will remember that.
So what's interesting about this one hole, Drake, real quick, if you were drafting down by him, you loved him because he was reaching and he was giving you value, or you could have had value. Some of these guys, a lot of these guys I was in, these are not normal drafters. So I wouldn't call these like, you go to a poker room and you've got regs and then you have tourists. I don't mean this in a bad way. This room was almost all tourists. The first thing I do when I get into a draft, I go look at the owners and I go immediately look to see if they've got a check mark by their name, which means they've won a decent amount of money, basically, playing. There were only 3 people in the room. I was one of them and 2 others. The other person was at pick 10 and the other one was in the middle. So actually, it might not have been the middle. It might have been pick 5. I think it was pick 5 was the other one. So a lot of times in these drafts, you may enter a room and sometimes you'll go look and all 12, you're literally sitting at a table, like if it's a poker comparison, with all really good players. And so it's a great draft to be in because typically more value falls. These folks don't necessarily know how they go. It may be their first one. They might be having a few brews. It gets a little bit more like a home league, even though it's a $350 league. But if you look at the one hole, despite the fact that, he was helping people around him by reaching too far, his reaches hurt me because he takes Russell Wilson in the 7th, which is fine. But look what he does in the 11th. He's like, oh, gotta get my second guy. Gotta get Matt Ryan, and so he's trying. That potentially could have started a run right on everybody trying to get their second quarterback, and I didn't even have one yet. He took Bryce Love in the 10th round. And if you look at my roster construction, Bryce Love was squarely in my plans, and he was going to be one of my picks at the 11-12 turn. Bryce Love never goes that early. What's Bryce Love's ADP?
I looked that up. What about his 8th round pick?
Yeah, Justin Jefferson. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's literally Chris Herndon. And again, we just talked about Herndon being a value, but you don't normally see him going that early. Now, I mean, he's starting to move up. I can't remember when Evan actually released that. If that was today, I mean, Ian Hartitz has been pumping up, Herndon for, 2 months. But so while he wasn't getting value on his picks, look at his 12th pick, Randall Cobb, a guy that I love to get in the 14th or 15th round. So he's literally taking these players that I like to wait on, or that became part of my plan. And for the guys that are drafting around them, they're like, wow, this guy has no clue what he's doing. He keeps leaving us all these players coming off the turn. But it was hurting me. And so that's kind of the perfect storm. He auto picks DeAndre Swift. That kills my round 5. So we'll fast forward to round 5. Todd Gurley goes. Kareem Hunt goes. Mark Ingram goes. We're 2 picks from me now. Cam Akers, Ronald Jones. The last 2 guys in my queue, right, for running back.
Yeah, you're not going to take Mostert or Singletary or Montgomery after that.
Yeah, I didn't want to. And so like I said earlier, I'd already made my decision. If Akers or Jones was not there, I was going to stay at receiver. And so I went with Parker and I went with Will Fuller. I know Will Fuller can be hurt, but if you guys have heard me talk about him in the weeks that he's playing, I don't care. He can win me the league every week. And that's what I was going for here. That's what I mean when I say I get hyper aggressive. The Will Fuller pick was a hyper aggressive pick to try to make up for something in a different way. And I already had my plan for how I was going to, come back and solidify myself behind Will Fuller. But I wanted to have Will Fuller on my team because I knew that I really need to be starting 4 receivers every week. And I need as much upside as I can get out of them. So coming back, it goes away from me, Drake, all those running backs you just talked about, Mostert, Singletary, Montgomery. And so coming back to us, again, I was hyper aggressive, and I've talked about it, where sometimes you just take your guys and you want to dictate. You don't want to sit there and think, well, I got to follow ADP. Fuck ADP. I'm done with it at this point, right?
That's what Frank Balboni did, taking Bryce Love in the 10th when he goes in the 13th.
You got to follow Balboni. Sorry, I don't think I've ever dropped an F-bomb on this show. That's terrible. But I'm not doing that. I'm swinging big at this point. And so in the 7th round, I went with Zach Moss. And in the first pick of the 8th, I took Damian Harris, the 2 guys we talked about earlier. And here's why. Once those other guys, were gone, who are the 2 running backs remaining that have had positive vibes pretty much the whole offseason? They're creeping in on their starter. They have a shot to literally be the lead guy, even though they may still be somewhat of a committee. They have youth on their side. I mean, the list starts to get pretty freaking small. And I knew that if I wanted both of them, maybe one of them makes it back to me, or maybe they both, but I didn't care at that point. I'm like, I'm going to own these 2 players. And so I took them. And I didn't feel terrible. I mean, I let Deontay Johnson go at receiver. I let Marvin Jones go. I like those guys. I like Christian Kirk. I like Deebo Samuel. But with my roster construction, because a lot of people will say, no, man, just keep taking receivers here. Well, I really like the receivers that I saw receivers were falling. And running backs were being, were getting reached on. So sometimes, yeah, that's the right thing. Well, I'll just keep taking receivers. But when I look at my tiers, the receivers that I knew that would probably be coming back to me in the 9th and the 10th were not that far behind the guys I was going to pass on. Mm-hmm. And the running backs that could potentially be coming back to me, if these 2 guys didn't, or one of them didn't, there just wasn't the same kind of player, right? I was going to then be depending like all on handcuffs. What do I do? Like take Chase Edmonds and Tony Pollard and just hope a starter gets hurt, So that was where I was at. But I did make a mistake here, Drake. So it comes back to me in the 9th. Do you want to announce this pick, Drake?
Yeah, we did it live on our show.
I feel like you should announce this. I feel like you should announce this pick.
So in the 9th round, Dwain was looking for his 5th wide receiver, and he went and picked the future 2020 Rookie of the Year from Texas Christian University, wide receiver Jalen Reagor of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Great announcement. Yeah. So, and I was happy about that.
Come on.
Yeah. Oh, I love him. I was happy about that pick. And Ruggs was there too. So I took them both. I think I made a mistake there looking back at it. That was the one spot where I was like, I should have taken one of them. And I think, Drake, I should have taken Boston Scott. I should have taken Chase Edmonds. You could make an argument for Tony Pollard, but I think Chase Edmonds, with us knowing that Drake is already dinged, and Boston Scott, with knowing Miles Sanders is already hurt, I think I should have taken one of those 2 players. And here's why. I knew receiver was still falling. These guys receivers are still falling down the board. And so if folks that are looking at this at home, you'll see the people I have circled or I have boxed in red. Those were the reaches. Those are the guys taken ahead of or right at ADP. The blue boxes are the players that were falling, and you'll see a ton of them are receivers. McCole Hardman didn't go to round 12. Curtis Samuel went in round 13. Brian Edwards went in round 16. Paris Campbell went in round 15. I could have taken Boston Scott or Chase Edmonds there, knowing that I was still going to get 1 or 2 of those guys if I wanted them. And so I should have let Ruggs go, and I should have taken one of those players because I just needed another running back at that point. Now, when it got back to me, Boston Scott nearly got back to me, which I would have turned Boston Scott and Josh Kelly in the 11-12 turn. And that's who I took, in the 11th was Joshua Kelly. He's going, and I got aggressive on him. ADP will say you can get him in the 12th or the 13th. I wasn't going to wait. This is the guy that has a shot at taking over Melvin Gordon's role. Again, another player that everything building up has been positive. Everything. What my plan is optimal would be I get Josh Kelly and Bryce Love there. And then I would have felt great. I got Mixon, Moss, Harris, Kelly, Love. Yeah, I would have missed out on Henry Ruggs, if I would have taken, Scott, but I would have been fine because
6.
Yeah, I would have been able to get Paris Campbell. I could have grabbed Paris Campbell and Bryan Edwards later. So that was my one mistake, and I still love Ruggs. It's nothing against Ruggs; it's a roster construction thing. That was the one moment where I was like, "Crap!" Like I knew it when I did it. I was like, "Man, I should have waited. I should have thought a second longer, like about that pick. It probably should have been Scott or Edmonds." So, but Kelly coming back was awesome, and I was elated, Drake, in the 12th to get my guy Irv Smith, because what I like about Irv Smith in this, it's tight end premium. He gives me another potential flex player. If he goes off in this format, you get him in the 12th round. If he goes off and he becomes the main tight end in a scheme that's basically the same as Kittle's, and he's a mismatch. He's not as fast as Kittle, but he's still a mismatch nightmare, especially on play action. We know Justin Jefferson hadn't stepped up. It's Olabisi Johnson. Great. Irv Smith is the guy that when I think about this team, he's the guy that needs to step up right now. Willie, he may not. And they may just keep him in a rotation with Rudolph and totally screw us. But the upside is there in this offense. So Smith gives me, another potential flex player. He's not just my backup tight end. So in this format, I love getting him there in the 12th. What am I not taking yet, Drake?
Quarterback.
Who we talk about? Do you remember last week? Here are my trigger points for quarterback.
Well, you get to round 12 and Cam Newton's sitting there, who I think is a dark horse MVP candidate. Yes, I said it. He's playing for Bill Belichick. People are stealing Cam Newton this late in drafts. It's unbelievable. I think him and Big Ben are the two biggest values in fantasy football. And
notice in the 12th round, after I picked Irv Smith, headed back the other way, man, I did get a little nervous because when I did that, I knew Stafford was there, Breeze was there, and Brady was there. And Newton was my fail-safe backup plan. And I knew there were 3 teams that didn't have a quarterback yet. I didn't anticipate them all 3 taking a quarterback right then. I thought what would happen is one of them or 2 of them may take a quarterback. Then the other will take a quarterback coming back, which would keep me safe, right, with Newton. I did have to sweat it like a little bit. It's because as soon as I picked, that guy jammed Stafford. It was like Stafford, then Breeze went, then Brady went, and I was like, crap, Cam Newton may not make it back to me. So I got a little bit lucky, there, because once that played out the way it did, it could have really been bad for me. So I took Newton, and we'll just round it out here. I won't talk about what everybody else did. But based on my roster construction, here we are. We've got Kittle, Mixon, Moore, Adam Thielen, Devontae Parker, Will Fuller. I can start all 4 of those receivers. The tight end, remember, is, tight end premium. I've got 1 running back. My whole is at running back. So I took the 2 upside players I wanted and Moss and Harris. I'm going to play Harris week 1. He's got the matchup I want. I think the Patriots are going to dominate. He can score 2 touchdowns. And so I'm going to play matchups with those 2 guys early in the season. And then Josh Kelly is essentially almost in the same tier as them. But I just knew I didn't have to take him as early. So the Will Fuller thing, we know he can get hurt, right? So I've got Rager and I've got Ruggs just sitting there waiting. And Devontae Parker does get some tough shadow matchups, Drake. So there will be certain weeks where I may fade Devontae Parker because I know he's like week 1, he's going to get Stephon Gilmore. I'm not real excited about that, but he did toast Stephon Gilmore in one of the matchups last year. It was one of the things that really pushed me into liking Parker.
Yeah, he traded White twice too.
Yeah, he's beating these really good corners. That just, showed us that he's going to a new level in his game. So that's where we are so far. So we got Ruggs, then we got Kelly. So basically I need Moss, Harris, or Kelly to hit. What else am I going to do on this team? Draft is only part of it. Man, I'm going to be hyper aggressive at running back with my free agent dollars. The first one that I think hits the wire, that I think is valuable, that I think, is going to have some kind of position, or I may bid a little bit, on a guy that I just want to use for a couple of weeks. If somebody's out with COVID-19, I'm going to be hyper aggressive on the wire also, on this team. So Irv Smith, Cam Newton, and here's how I rounded it out. I just had to basically, I had Damian Harris. So in the 14th round, I took Sony Michel. Do I like Sony Michel? Do I really want to own him? No. But when I own Damian Harris, there's a chance we're wrong about Damian Harris. What if, again, there's going to be surprises. What do we do if week 1 they come out and Sony Michel's the starter? Well, in round 14, I can afford to take him. Mm-hmm. Carlos Hyde. Why do I take Carlos Hyde? He's an old running back that nobody wants. Well, he's on a team that loves to run the ball with their primary 2 running backs coming off of injuries. Carlos Hyde is a sneaky late round pick in this kind of scenario that I don't mind taking in round 15 or 16. He's perfect for this kind of team. Then I took Raquel Armstead, right? He's the main guy behind Leonard Fournette. Then I took Anthony McFarland. I got greedy here, Drake. I took Anthony McFarland, and I took the Patriots defense because I love the Patriots early. I think their week 1 matchup can help make up for me not having a running back. And he pairs well with Damian Harris. And I like their defense overall, period, right? And I think they're still a top 3 defense, this season. But what I tried to get sneaky with was Benny Snell. I tried to sneak Benny Snell back to me. I thought about just going McFarland and Snell there instead of taking New England. That maybe is what I should have done. I still like owning the Patriots defense, but I thought Snell would fall back to me in the 19th. So I kind of got a little cute. And then I took Devin Asiasi as my 3rd tight end. And then I took my kicker last, Matt Prater, on an offense that I love in Detroit that did really good things until Matt Stafford got hurt last year. So I like Matt Prater this year. But that's it, man. So again, I didn't force the running backs I didn't want. I took the receivers that I would much rather own DJ Moore and Adam Thielen than these guys made it easy for me because they took them in front of me. But had Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette, and Le'Veon Bell all been there at the 3-4 turn, I wouldn't have taken any of them over DJ Moore or Adam Thielen. I already took my medicine by taking Joe Mixon. I didn't even really want to take Joe Mixon, but I did because I at least think he's young. He's talented. He's got the upside. He's, going to still get the majority of the work. So I took Mixon, in my 2nd round. And that was the guy that I kind of forced a little bit just to make sure I had a running back. And I wasn't going to do it again, coming back. And again, they made it easy because I got to have Moore and Thielen.
Now,
and then Parker Fuller, and then upside running backs.
Coming out of this draft, and there's going to be listeners who say, hey, I want to take Kelsey or Kittle on the turn and differentiate myself. Looking at how this roster came out and the choices that you had every time you were on the board, would you recommend that strategy to somebody in our audience?
Not in a non-tight end premium, I wouldn't. If you're in a tight end premium league, I would. I think it can give you a differentiated advantage. But what you need to do is look at my board right now. Because, look, I did the best I could in this scenario, but I don't love this team. It's a different team. I won't own many teams that are going to look like this. So that, I like the idea of having something different. I like the idea of getting to be aggressive because normally I'm taking receivers where I'm probably going to have to pull the trigger on Zach Moss and Damian Harris. So I get to own them. I didn't let other folks dictate the draft to me, but when you look at my roster, Drake, literally, I have no clue who my running back 2 is. So you got to look at something like that. And if you're in a 12-man league, if that makes you nervous, you need to take note because this is what could very easily happen to you. Now, again, I was 2 picks away from Cam Akers. And the 10 hole, the guy drafting in 10 was the other regular. So I kind of knew it. I was like, man, he's not going to let Akers by. He's just not. He's not going to let it. And had the DeAndre Swift pick not happened in the 3rd, Drake, this whole thing might have turned out differently. You just throw DeAndre Swift into going normally in the 5th. this guy might have still taken Ronald Jones, and I might have gotten DeAndre, Swift with, my 12th pick of the 5th round. But it's like you said earlier, crazy crap happens. And so you have to take it into account. And that's why I wanted to show this on the show. One, I wanted to talk about the mistake I made. But number two, if you want to draft, and do something like this, you've got to be comfortable being able to pivot and like get hyper aggressive. Unless you're okay taking one of those running backs that I just do not want any part of in the 3rd or 4th round. And again, because of opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. It's not just about those players. It's that I have receivers graded there that I think have a better floor and a higher ceiling than all those guys. Obviously, yes, Jonathan Taylor has a super high ceiling, but he has to have a lot of crap work out, for him to get there. He's super talented, plays with a great offensive line, but Nyheim Hines is getting more and more pub every day. Sounds like they're going to use him even more. Even if they don't, he was used for all the 2-minute drill stuff last year. So Jonathan Taylor, I would say if I was going to take a guy out of all those, he might be the one that I would. If you just want to get, if he made it to you and you're like, what, screw it, I'm just going to get aggressive. Fine. I mean, go ahead. But you're kind of hoping Jonathan Taylor is going to do what the receivers that you could draft, what you're already pretty sure they're going to do. And I don't like that logic. You know what I mean?
I hear you. Well, folks, I hope you learned a little something from Dwain's draft here. We appreciate him dropping $350 to teach us all some lessons.
Know who my running back 2 is?
Frank Balboni?
$350 to not know who my RB2 is. Ooh. Yeah, it's going to be it could be a real shit show.
So, folks, we appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. If you head over to the YouTube page, click that subscribe button, leave us some comments, let us know how your drafts are going. We appreciate it. We're on Twitter at FF Hustle, also on Instagram. If you guys are on there, we don't post any bikini pictures or anything. I know that's why you're all on Instagram, but we post random stuff here and there. I'm at Drake Fantasy. He is at Dwain McFarland. Good luck this weekend, folks. Draft some kick-ass teams. Check out our draft plan, and we'll be back, sooner or later to get you ready for Labor Day weekend, man, because that's when my big draft is. So I'm going to be just texting Dwain off the hook, like, do I take this guy? Should I take this guy? It'll be a lot of fun. But for Dwain, I'm Drake. We'll see you later. Never get out hustled, folks. Good luck this weekend.